Do you find sometimes in speaking to young people, especially, and that's been your forte over the years with universities, things, where there tends to be people who really are kind of agnostic, who then call themselves atheists when they're really not?
Yeah, well, I mean, yeah, because of course it's a vogue thing to do. I mean, the last thing a young person wants is to be accused of needing a crutch, right? Or to be accused of, perhaps, not having the guts to face reality. So when somebody actually criticizes their faith, instead of going, well, wait a minute, I know there might be some arguments here that should be considered from the vantage point of science itself, which we'll be discussing in this program. A lot of them will just say, well, I can handle it. I don't need a crutch. I guess I'm an atheist. And of course, it's what I call pressurized atheism. In other words, you're kind of a coward if you don't declare yourself, or you're not in vogue. You don't have that kind of avant-garde intellectual kind of capacity to declare yourself an atheist. And a lot of if you're insecure, right, and a lot of adolescents have not come yet to their sort of real self-identity. They're still kind of looking around for acceptance from a lot of people. They're not looking for self-acceptance first, then the acceptance of others. There's still acceptance of others first, then self-acceptance. In that case, a lot of times they can be pressurized into atheism or try to look very avant-garde, which means look very intellectual, by declaring themselves an atheist.
I hate to say it.
And of course, they have no idea.
Yeah, I hate to say it. I think sometimes with the poor vocabulary out there, most people know what an atheist is. They're not sure what an agnostic even is. If somebody said, well, I'm agnostic.
Yeah.
I mean, you hear about it more actually in technology today. The word agnostic gets used when you talk about some open system that's agnostic. That's where you hear it more.
Yeah. Oh yeah, we need to do a better job in our schools and a better job in our religious education, both, in informing people about, what the gradations are. And like I said, even, even Dawkins, who used to be a radical atheist, has now moved to the agnostic side. So, I mean, there's no reason why, if Dawkins can do that, why would any young person who does not have scientific knowledge at all, or maybe has a limited amount of scientific knowledge, move to the radical extreme of atheism? My answer is they don't know any better. That's generally the reason.
Would you give him some credit for some level of honesty, maybe, in the sense of being willing to go and move forward that way?
Yeah, I do give him credit for that, and I do give, there have been several atheists who've really moved their position as well to theism, and I give them credit for doing that. In the case of Dawkins, though, I must admit that, he leaves out so much evidence for God from both philosophy and science. It's utterly stunning. I mean, the old logical expressions. It's like Logic 101. What's the thing you learn the first day? There are far more errors of omission than commission. If you leave out huge volumes worth of evidence for God, and you sort of give this kind of trite sort of approach to atheism, there I have dashed off St. Thomas Aquinas. Well, no, he didn't dash off St. Thomas Aquinas. He basically gave a facile explanation for the 5 ways and never talked about Thomas's metaphysics, never demonstrated that he had any grasp of the real distinction between existence and essence, or the ontological priority of existence over essence. I mean, for all intents and purposes, it was really a straw man, not Thomas Aquinas, who kind of got dashed off. And so, that sort of thing, that kind of mitigates I get good feelings about Dawkins' honesty on the one hand, when he sort of says, well, I'm sort of like an agnostic leaning toward atheism rather than atheist. But then, of course, when he does those real errors of omission, and Stephen Hawking does some pretty radical errors of omission as well, and we'll probably talk about that in the next episode. That's the stuff that really gets me, because, you really do do have to present the case for theism and then criticize the good case for theism if you really want to be an atheist, right? Because, of course, you cannot disprove the existence of God rationally. It's not possible. You can't do it by an empirical method, right, which is what we call a posteriori evidence. And why can't you? Because if you're going to disprove God or disprove anything by a posteriori evidence, by an empirical method, you would need to observe everything that there was to observe. Notice that you had the capacity to observe everything that there was to observe, and then notice that God wasn't there. Now, can this ever be done? No, because the first problem is you can't observe anything outside of the universe, so that really limits your capacity. And secondly, the idea that you could observe everything in the universe is absolutely, ridiculous. So, of course, you can't ever get a posteriori evidence against God. It's a completely impossible task. So the only thing left is a priori evidence against God. And of course, if you take a priori evidence against God, that means non-contradictory evidence against God. Well, here's the problem. In order to have a contradiction, you need to have only restricted entities can contradict other restricted entities. Okay. The law of non-contradiction can't work without restricted entities. And here's the problem. God is an unrestricted, uncaused reality existing through itself. And so how can you disprove by contradiction an unrestricted reality? The answer is you can't. It's impossible. Therefore, if you can't do it with a priori evidence, and you can't do it with a posteriori evidence, and you can't do it with a combination of both because you got no possibility of doing it with either, then you're not going to ever disprove God rationally. That's not possible. So the only way you can be, I believe, a rational atheist is you're going to have to take the real evidence that exists, the good case that's been made in science and in philosophy, and critique it significantly to show that it is ineffective. And that I defy can be done. So, I mean, I have a whole website, magiscenter.com.
Right.
Just go to the faith and science thing. We've got philosophical proofs of God, Thomistic proofs of God, scientific evidence for God. That's the case. Right. There's a lot of evidence there. And just don't blow off the theory of entropy. We'll talk about that today. Can't just blow off the Bordova-Lincoln and Guth proof. You're not just going to blow off the fine-tuning evidence, and you're not just going to blow off, the Thomistic real distinction between existence and essence. You're not going to blow off Lonergan's proof for God. I mean, these are things that are exceedingly well established, that have passed the muster of very good scholars and scientists for a long, long time, which are excellent rational grounding for the existence of God.